Welcome to the program. My guest is Shaun Kenney. Shaun is the former executive director of the Republican Party of Virginia and a contributing editor at The Bearing Drift. You can find it online. It's Virginia's conservative voice. Shaun, welcome to the program.
No, thank you for having me.
So, we're going to talk today about the convention last week, the Republican Party convention in Cleveland. This will be a post-mortem for our viewers, your perspective on what happened, some of the key takeaways, and I want to begin with this question. What do you think historians will make of the nomination of Donald Trump for the Republican Party in the race for the White House this year? What did they make of that and what happened in Cleveland?
Well, it'd certainly be a post-mortem for the party of Reagan. I think in the final analysis, what you see here is where the Republican Party and the American right finally turn a little bit more towards their European counterparts on the far right. And I think that's what you're seeing here is that the conservative era where, Buckley, Goldwater, Reagan, captured the hearts and minds of America for 40 years, that has effectively ended at this point. And whether or not it's a blip, we don't know yet. But I think in the final analysis for historians, this is a moment where the politics of the European far right have arrived on American shores.
We certainly saw throughout the convention leaders following Trump's example, fanning the flames of nativism and racism and xenophobia, and many commentators, and I'm among them, have said that, boy, every night we were reminded of reasons why America sucks and we need to be afraid.
Sure.
It was just like, is this the Republican Party? What's happened?
Well, I mean, we saw this the same way with President Obama, right? So it's a simulacrum of what certain people on the right believe works so well with the left, right? And you saw this with the anti-war movement. You saw it from the left. So, and you see it from Bernie Sanders as well. There's nothing there, and this is why Donald Trump mentioned Bernie Sanders so many times during his acceptance speech, right? He's trying to capture that spirit of angst, that spirit of fear. In the aftermath of Orlando, the coup in Turkey, the incidents in Munich, for instance, all of these things sort of line up in creating an atmosphere of fear to make people believe that they are unsafe in an era where we've never been safer before, to make people believe that the world is off-center, to make people believe that somebody's stealing from them. I mean, look, the bottom line is that in reality, we're living in a golden age. I mean, never has human prosperity been more active in today's world than right now. But all of that having been said, to manufacture the fear and then sell it back to the American people, to make people believe that something's being taken away from them, that's there. And there are legitimate grievances out there. I'm certainly not discounting any of that.
Oh, and I totally agree with you.
Yeah, I mean, there's plenty of that out there.
Americans are right to be angered about a corrupt political system
Absolutely.
that no longer represents the vast majority of Americans.
But the solution for that sort of corruption is not a different sort of corruption, right? The solution for fear is not authoritarianism, it's freedom. And what we heard from Donald Trump was a little bit more along the lines of authoritarianism and the law and order style approach, rather than what you'd hear from Reagan, what you'd hear from Buckley, what you'd hear from Goldwater, which would be liberty, freedom, getting government out of people's lives. This is a very different approach, and to me, that's ultimately extraordinarily concerning.
And that speaks to the reasons that you made clear months ago when you were one of the first Republican leaders in Virginia who went on record saying, not only will I not support Trump if he is the nominee, I will actively campaign against his victory.
Yeah, I mean, the bottom line is, and folks have said this time and time again, and you even heard it from Trump's vice president. I mean, certain people are Republicans. I'm a conservative before I'm a Republican. I'm a practicing Catholic and a Christian before I'm ever a conservative. At the end of the day, what Donald Trump believes just isn't what I believe. And the arguments that, well, the other person is worse, that doesn't make Trump any better. The arguments that somehow I need to choose between, one evil or the other, it's basic lifeboat ethics at the end of the day. I mean, if you're presented with two immoral choices, the only moral choice is not to make a choice, or find a third alternative that's more consonant with
and
your
they're
values.
out there. Jill Stein running in the Green Party, Gary Johnson running as a Libertarian.
If that's what people consent to, that's fine. Yeah. I mean, for a lot of conservatives, myself included, the option may very well be just to stay at home and see what happens. But at the end of the day, This new movement that's being forged by Trump, the things that he mentioned in his acceptance speech, that's not the party of Reagan. That's not the party of Lincoln. That's not the reason why a lot of people got involved into the Republican Party. It's a very different approach, and that sort of European far-right extremism, for lack of a better phrase. Goldwater had his old line, right, where extremism in the defense of liberty is no vice. Well, this modern Republican Party, 50 years later, it's certainly extremism. There's certainly plenty of vice, but you don't hear a whole lot of liberty. You hear much more authoritarianism, and that bothers me.
Well, I saw a review of Trump's speech where the times that he mentions the word liberty or freedom, I think it's one time where he actually used the word freedom, which again, this is the point, very different from a Republican Party that we've been used to in the modern age.
But very different from Reagan, very different from the ideas he espoused, very different from Goldwater, very different from Buckley, and sort of the intellectual impetus behind conservatism. I really have a hard time struggling to find many words that Donald Trump used to describe his own policies that had more than one syllable: big, win, huge, wall. I mean, these things aren't exactly. I mean, he's playing to the sentiments of fear. He's playing to a very base appetite of the American public. And I think what really bothers me is not so much that Trump is selling it. But I think what bothers me overall is that people seem inclined to buy it.
Yeah.
And that's not what I thought the Republican Party was. Quite honestly.
It makes you want to go back and read a little Plato, who warned us about how democracies, if they make the mistake of allowing them, if a democracy allows itself to be corrupted to the point where it only serves the interests of an elite, wealthy oligarch class, you will absolutely make it almost inevitable that you'll see a demagogue rise up, an authoritarian figure, and become a dictator.
And that's exactly what you're seeing now. It's all demagoguery, right? It's all attack. There's no substance behind it. It's only saccharine. And you're exactly right. When you start collecting power into the hands of the few and take it away from the many, what happens is that the few begin to set the rules, and they set them in their favor. I mean, you even heard it from Donald Trump.
And this is not about party.
No,
Democrats are just as guilty of this kind of thing. This is about power.
And perhaps more guilty than the Republicans in this regard. I mean, Hillary Clinton, she has her merits, but she's just as much in the corporatist camp as Donald Trump might be. I mean, they're both crony capitalists at the end of the day. They're both participating from a rigged system.
Agreed.
How do you reconcile those things? I don't know. But the problem is that they're setting the rules for us. It's not that we're setting the rules for them. And that's a terrifying dynamic in the American Republic. I've got to believe, and I still believe, that the American system works. I believe that in my fellow human beings and my neighbors to actually put forward a good and decent polity. But when the few start setting the rules for the many and we're just forced to choose between bad options, that's a sickness. And that's something that thankfully there are opportunities for us to cure it.
When your political system has been bought and sold to serve the interests of a fraction of your population, that's not freedom. That's not democracy. That's the theater of democracy, the reality of a plutocracy. And as you say, at the end of the day, the government that was created to protect the human and civil rights with which people are born. The government doesn't give you freedom. You're born with them. It's your birthright. And we create governments to protect those freedoms. And when the government no longer protects them and profits off of crippling and destroying and suppressing them, we've got a problem.
Yeah, and credit this to whether it's Bernie Sanders supporters or Donald Trump supporters, right? They're tired of getting the breadcrumbs from this system and being told it's all okay, right? That's not the basis for prosperity. Completely agree, totally get that. But the solution to that is not a different sort of authoritarianism, right? Where you just get a bigger slice of that pie. That doesn't work, or socialism, or more control, or whatever the case may be. The solution for this ought to be individual freedom. If we start approaching things with the question, how do we solve these problems with more freedom? I don't care what the question is, but if we can approach them like this rather than looking for a strong man to fix these problems or a strong woman to fix these problems, that's a solution. Maybe this election season will be a wake-up call. I'm hopeful. Yeah. I don't know.
It speaks to conversations I've had before with folks who say that the next great American revolution is going to happen at the local level when people insist with their local governments that we recapture some of the human liberty and freedom that's been stolen from us.
Yeah, and I honestly
that it's
hope
not
that's
a
true.
macro national kind of thing. It's just going to bubble up
Sure.
locally.
Sure, and actually, you were the one who introduced me to that kind of idea, and I've totally bit hard on it. I mean, that's exactly where this is going to be. And you've been very adamant as well. The revolution will be peaceful. It will not be violent. It will not be based on fear. It will not be predicated on any of our baser natures. I totally believe that. There's still that Jeffersonian optimism that's still, and I think it's bipartisan at the end of the day. The question is whether or not bipartisanly are we just going to, is the light switch going to go on and say, wait a second, this isn't the way it ought to be,
right?
Or is it going to be something different, and is it going to take more time for us to get there?
The solution is not the villagers grabbing their pitchforks and rushing to the castle. It's not an angry populist mob mentality where you're pointing fingers and looking for the enemy among you. The answer, as you say, is and always has been, how do we protect and strengthen human freedoms?
Yep.
Let's do this. Let's take a very quick break, and then when we get back, let's look at some of the specifics from the convention, Melania's speech, Cruz, Donald Trump's speech, and we'll sort of pick it apart and unpack it and look at some things at the convention. Shaun Kenney is with me. I'm Coy Barefoot. A quick break. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Shaun Kenney is with me. Shaun is the former executive director of the Republican Party of Virginia, and you can read his commentaries online at bearingdrift.com. Shaun, we're going to take a look at some video here, some excerpts from the Republican National Convention last week in Cleveland. We begin with an excerpt of the speech that made headlines first, the first night. And it made headlines across the country. As a matter of fact, I stayed up late. I was up till about 4 o'clock that night, 4 a.m. And before I went to bed, it was already national news. People were already fact-checking. Let's take a quick look at what we're talking about.
We want our children in this nation to know that the only limit to your achievements is the strength of your dreams and your willingness to work for them.
So that was the speech that made headlines first. Melania Trump, and we since know this for a fact, lifted words out of Michelle Obama's speech from 4 years before. What do you make of that?
That's an honor violation, right? Take that to any UVA student.
You actually are a member of the honor committee at the University of Virginia, in case you didn't know.
Yes, I sit on UVA honor. There's just no excuse for that. And what kills me is not so much that this occurred, right? I mean, it was pretty self-evident that Melania ended up taking the best of previous speeches by first ladies or contenders thereof. That's all well and good. It took 2 days for them to come back out and throw their speechwriter under the bus, and it took a New York Times article to actually come out and say, it's like, well, this is how it really went down, and only then could they throw the speechwriter under the bus. Which, really, guys, it's sloppy. It's sloppy. I mean, these things are rehearsed. They're run through several speechwriters, communications directors, campaign managers, and nobody.
They have software programs to make sure that they're
plagiarism
not plagiarizing.
Yeah, I mean, just simple, basic.
None of that was done.
None of it was done. None of it was done. Appreciate the sentiments. Wish they were her own ideas.
And and I agree with you. What bothers me most about it was not that she lifted the words, but was the hubris that followed it.
Yes.
Frankly, you see the same thing with a woman with a private email server playing fast and loose with state secrets on a vulnerable server in her home that circles the wagons, and the hubris that follows that as well. Like, well, how dare you insinuate that I did anything wrong.
Yeah, and you know what? All well and good, right? So Hillary Clinton did that, fine. That's horrible, it's terrible. Should something different have happened? Fine, we can argue that all day long. It doesn't make what Melania Trump did any better or worse, right? I mean, that's one tactic that I absolutely loathe in American politics, to say, well, this person did it too. I mean, look, I've got multiple children. When somebody else comes back and says, well, he did it too, it's like, well, I'm not talking about that person. You did this.
Right.
This is your fault. Take ownership. That argumentation just doesn't last. I mean, it's sloppy. Basic steps could have been taken to prevent this. It wasn't done. They thought they could get away with it.
Yeah.
Didn't happen.
As we read in the New York Times piece, there were professional speechwriters, GOP speechwriters, saying this was such an easy win.
Yeah.
Her speech, it was a gimme. It was just such an easy win, and they blew that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, who's going to criticize a First Lady's speech? It doesn't happen. It doesn't happen. I mean, you'd be hard-pressed to find that in American politics. This is the opportunity to humanize Donald Trump. And again, distractions were put on the table, and easy distractions to avoid.
So once again, they snatched victory.
Or defeat from the jaws of victory.
Yeah.
Yes.
So let's look at another one. This is the next speech that made huge headlines from the Republican National Convention. Watch this.
I want to congratulate Donald Trump on winning the nomination last night. Vote your conscience, vote for candidates up and down the ticket who you trust to defend our freedom and to be faithful to the Constitution. I appreciate the enthusiasm of the New York delegation. And God bless the United States of America.
So what do we make of that?
That's why Ted Cruz is such a popular guy in Washington.
He did not endorse Donald Trump.
No.
As everyone was sitting there waiting for him to do. As a matter of fact, he didn't only not endorse Trump, he used the code dog whistle, vote your conscience, which among Republicans has become a way of saying, I don't support Trump.
Of course, or stay at home, right? Or do whatever you want. But the bottom line here is that, look, I mean, Ted Cruz had the opportunity to unite the ticket, right? Set aside whether or not you like Ted Cruz or like Donald Trump or whatever the case may be. He could have gone up there and done something honorable. He could have done up there and been the hero and united both factions. He could have still run in 2020. He could have done all those things that he said he wanted to do. He could have, I mean, and granted, yes, bitter campaign trail. I mean, somebody says your dad shot JFK. Okay, I get that. But he could have done something that would have benefited him and made him a uniter and a leader. And instead, he just sort of played like Jeffrey Baratheon on Game of Thrones and like whack and then walks off stage. I just don't get it. But I think at the end of the day, you get a glimpse into Ted Cruz's character. This is the man folks know in Washington. This is the man that nobody can get along.
Cruz. All about Cruz.
It's all about Cruz, and this is his character. This is who he is.
You think he lost a lot of Republican fans that night?
He lost a tremendous number of Republican fans that night. And let's be honest. I mean, there's a lot of like the Never Trumpers and all that. It's not a coalesced group, right? You've got a large faction of Ted Cruz supporters, that's true. But you've got others, the intellectuals, the National Review set, the establishment set. Right. They don't all talk to one another.
It's just a sentiment that's spread across different groups.
Exactly. But what Cruz was trying to do, or what he thought he was trying to do, was become the leader of that movement. And over the course of time, whether it was Cuccinelli throwing down his credentials and throwing his fit on the floor, whether it was the speech, he's literally forfeited the mantle of leadership. And so, if his goal was to be that leader of the resistance, he absolutely erased that over the last week. It's just not there.
Yeah. Let's look at a clip from the big speech of the convention, and it was the last speech of the convention. The words, I think it ran over an hour, didn't it?
It ran longer than that, yeah.
Long speech of the Republican nominee for president, Donald Trump.
Nobody knows the system better than me. Which is why I alone can fix it. The day I take the oath of office, Americans will finally wake up in a country where the laws of the United States are enforced. We will make America safe again. And we will make America great again. God bless you and good night. I love you.
The remarks of Donald Trump at the Republican National Convention last week in Cleveland. Shaun, what do you think?
Again, it goes back to that old idea where 50 years ago it was extremism in the defense of liberty is no vice. Now all we hear is extremism and vice. And what you don't hear in any of that is the sort of like the Reaganism that everybody loved and adored in the 1980s. It was we're going to make America great again. It's the law and order approach. It's,
America's not great.
America is not great.
But we'll make it great again.
I don't know when we stop being
exactly.
Great,
yes,
but,
exactly. That's what I was wanting to do the whole speech.
Yeah.
When did America stop being such a great country?
If there's a greater country, move there, or if the immigration system allows you. But the bottom line is he took a page right out of the Nixonian playbook, right?
From '68.
This
I'm
is
the law and order
speech. This is this is the law and order speech, and that just I don't know about anybody else, but that scares me. I mean that's not
worked for Nixon.
I guess it worked for Nixon, and there's the play, right? Is that for every bad thing that happens in the news, it plays right into Trump's hands, right? It's it's a scary world. Only I can protect you. It's every terrorist attack, ISIL does something, Russia makes a move. Well, Russia, who knows? I mean, Trump and Russia seem to have a pretty cozy relationship at the moment.
Yes.
A too cozy relationship.
Well, and he constantly expresses his admiration for autocrats around the world.
Yes.
Whether it's North Korea or Russia or Libya. He admires the strong man. He admires the tyrant.
To the point where he's willing to disband and leave the NATO alliance. I mean, this is the cornerstone, the cornerstone of American security for the last 60 years in the post-World War II era. And he's literally, if Russia invades one of the Baltic states, are you going to rush to their aid? And the answer is no. They haven't paid their dues. This is not a magazine subscription. This is the cornerstone of American diplomacy. I mean, it just strikes me as abhorrent. The bottom line here is that, again, it was a very authoritarian speech. And it's one of those things where, you look at the folks that are supporting Trump across the board. I forget who did the polling on this. There's sort of a narrative where, people who support Trump are rubes. That's actually not true. I mean, they actually cut right across every spectrum, every class, no matter what your education level is, you're going to find some sort of fraction that actually supports Donald Trump.
Millions of educated, smart Americans will vote for Donald Trump.
It's the appeal to authoritarianism that is the strand that unites them all. And that, to me, when your government becomes so big, when citizens in a republic become so detached from their government, that they feel like they just can push it off to a guy like Donald Trump and say, just fix it. That's concerning to me. That's not my idea of how American democracy is supposed to work.
Right.
And I think that should concern a lot of people. There are certain things that, regardless of your political perspective, that do unite us. And I think that some of those very basic understandings of who we are being eroded by a Trump candidacy. And that, frankly, concerns me very deeply.
So, Shaun, what happens next? We go to Philadelphia for the Democratic National Convention. We'll certainly be watching that very closely. How does this play out?
So obviously Hillary at this point has pretty much a baked-in 5-point lead. They've got an advantage in the Electoral College at this rate. Trump will see a bounce, so he'll even out the polls a little bit. Those polls will water back down. Hillary will get her bounce after the Philadelphia convention. She'll get a 5-point bounce out of that. The press will pretty much declare that this election is over, right? Hillary's got a 10-point lead, and that kicks you off into August. And that 10-point lead will whittle down to 5. And Trump will say that he's cutting into her, and that's not the case.
And the media will play up the horse race of, hey, he's coming from behind.
Yeah, we'll get all that in October, then it reaches its denouement. I mean, at the end of the day, you look at the map, Virginia's leaning Democratic, it's not going anywhere. Iowa's leaning Democratic. Colorado, New Mexico, they're leaning Democratic. Florida's leaning Democratic. Georgia is a toss-up. Utah
the fact
is
that
a
Georgia
toss-up.
is a toss-up is amazing.
Yeah, it's absolutely insane. Here's the problem, right? So you start looking at the American electorate, it's like 17% are African American. 17% are Hispanic. How many angry white guys are there in America? And Trump is clearly going after the Rust Belt. That's where he thinks he can win. Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, upstate New York. He really thinks that he's going to capture that block. The question is when you start looking at polling where, like, literally, Trump is getting 0% of the African American vote and 0% of the Hispanic vote in certain states. Where does he make up the difference? There's just not enough angry white guys in America for him to play this identity politics card and expect victory. It'll get him a nice white-hot core of support, but it's not going to get him to victory. The only way that Trump really gets across the finish line, and no Democrat who's listening to this to say, oh, well, it's in the bag, I can do whatever I want. The only thing that gets him across the finish line is if the race is so negative and so deplorable that people say a pox upon both your houses and they just sit out. And that's a possibility.
Right.
It's that kind of race.
Low voter turnout, as we know, tends to benefit the Republican Party, tends to benefit conservatives.
And it does, because most Republicans are very loyal voters, right? And they run, I mean, if you're pro-life, you're going to vote. If you're pro-education, sometimes you stay home. That's sort of the difference between the two. And so it plays to Republican appetites. It plays in negative campaigning because it pushes down the voter base to a loyal, dutiful core.
Right.
And that's the Trump strategy at this point. It's worked very well for him through the primaries. It worked well. It captured him the nomination. There's no reason to expect it's going to be any different. The only advantage here is that Clinton is just as much a brass knuckles fighter as Donald Trump.
And has a whole lot more money right now to spend on a general campaign.
And has
way more money.
Has a media that leans left, right? So, let's be honest about the biases. A lot of them. A lot of them.
Not all.
Now, the Republicans, to their credit, they're building their own ecosystems. But at the end of the day, Clinton has every advantage. But then again, Bush had every advantage. Rubio had every advantage.
And as you like to say, there's a reason we have elections, because we don't know who wins until we have it.
There we go.
Yeah. Shaun, thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for all the work you do. Shaun Kenney is the former director of the Republican Party of Virginia. You can read his work online at bearingdrift.com, where he is a contributing editor. It's Virginia's conservative voice. I'm Coy Barefoot. You can find the complete archive of our program online at mediaandcitizenship.org. Have a great week, and y'all be good to each other.